Hey, welcome to Brian for Liberty. We're going to start today with something that should be making everybody nervous. We are getting far too comfortable with using law enforcement and criminal charges and arresting people as a tool in our political arena. In fact, that Trump's being indicted and the Department of Justice is coming after him. And this story from Texas, where a Texas sheriff is recommending criminal charges against Ron Desantis. Let me get into this story with you real quick here. Texas sheriff files criminal case over DeSantis' flight to Martha's Vineyard. So a Texas sheriff has recommended criminal charges over flights that the Florida governor, Ron DeSantis, arranged to deport 49 South American migrants from San Antonio to Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts last year. Now, in a statement Monday, the Bexar County Sheriff's Office said it filed a criminal case with the local district attorney over the flight. Now, a couple of things here. First, this is a political stunt, and I don't support Ron DeSantis in doing this incredibly stupid thing. Really just using people as a pawn in his political games. The groups were told they would have jobs and housing. So you have this little case here that where potentially you could say, yeah, he misled these people, put them on a plane, and that's criminal. But at the end of the day, if you're not are you going to arrest the people who were in the flight? Because they came into the country illegally. So you're not going to arrest them. So the sheriff here is also playing a political game. He knows he's not going to file charges on DeSantis. He knows it's not going to go anywhere if he does. The other thing I want to point out in this story, I also want to read this part of the story for you. DeSantis created an urgent humanitarian situation in deporting the migrants, officials said. A humanitarian situation or a humanitarian crisis, these people in places like Martha's Vineyard, largely liberal, Democrat voting, open borders type people, have no problem with the humanitarian crisis that's a constant state of reality in the South. They have no problem with that whatsoever. This is a classic NIMBY case where not in my backyard, but as long as it's not happening here, yes, I could be a bleeding heart humanitarian all I want and say people should be allowed to flood into the country and all this stuff. But we're going to be super upset when these people, we weren't prepared for them. They just showed up on our doorstep. Yeah, that's how it works in border towns. And I think that most people get this, except, of course, the people who are complaining and the people who are angry at DeSantis. It is a political stunt, but maybe it brings attention to a problem that people are ignoring because they don't actually understand the scope of it and what is actually happening down there. And maybe this is just a tiny little taste of it. What really bothers me is that we're getting far, far too comfortable with the idea that if we have a politician that we don't agree with, that it's okay to file criminal charges, to use the Department of Justice, that we can criminally prosecute our political enemies. That is not an American thing at all. You've seen what's happened to people when it comes to the school board stuff and being labeled domestic terrorists. Now it's not just rhetoric when there's actual criminal charges being involved. And so it really should give us all pause that we're getting very comfortable with the idea that, well, I don't like what this politician did, so I'm going to file criminal charges. That's a dangerous road for us to go down. Got another story here from the ridiculous category. Let me bring this up here. This just blows my mind. Congress is sticking students with the check. This is about student loan forgiveness as Central Washington rallies around the Fiscal Responsibility Act. The GOP austerity bill, which, by the way, we're spending as much as we did. This is COVID era spending that we're agreeing to. This isn't pre-COVID levels. This is the short attention span of the American voters. And this is what gets us in trouble is that we forget that we increased government spending massively during COVID. And this bill, this austerity bill, is essentially the same spending. This bloated COVID era spending is being touted as an austerity bill now. Like we can barely get by on this. But here's what really gets me about this is, They put this title, Congress is sticking students with the check, a centrist Washington rallies around the Fiscal Responsibility Act. Student debtors are facing a far less pleasing lesson on bipartisan lawmaking. The debt agreement abolishes the pandemic-era pause on student debt repayments. Yes, it was a pandemic-era pause. Even Biden has come out and said the pandemic's over. So let's get back to it here. You still have to pay your bills. The White House press secretary was out there, it's American tradition. We take out this money, said we're going to spend it, now we have to pay our bills. You have to pay your bills. They're sticking college students with the check. Well, it's a check for the meal that they ate. They're at the restaurant. They already ate the meal. Now you got to pay the bill. You borrowed the money. You have to pay it back. This kind of false narrative about we're screwing these people, these kids borrowed this money of their own free will. Nobody kicked their door down and said, here's a bunch of money. You have to take it. They borrowed this money. They have to pay it back. And so the Congress is sticking students with the check is essentially saying you have to pay back your bills. Congress sticking me with a bill because I got to make my own car payment, my own mortgage payment. It's ridiculous. So it's just another story I wanted to hit on real quick. And then last but not least, the U.S. owes an $80 trillion in climate reparations. So the first thing we're going to do is call it reparations because Every single policy has to have some hint of racial inequality, because we have to be able to accuse anybody who stands against our agenda of being racist. That's how we get things done. We have to use terms like racism, homophobia, xenophobia. We have to use these things to describe our enemies, to make them cower in fear and go along to get along. Because heaven forbid you get accused of being something that you're not because you don't agree with a particular policy. Now you can lose your job, your livelihood, your reputation. We have to wrap all of our policies in this label. The study highlights inequities in the remaining carbon. Oh my God. The study highlights inequities in the remaining carbon that the world can emit before invoking even more catastrophic climate events. Wealthier countries like the U.S., the United Kingdom, and Germany are not only responsible for the largest share of current and historic emissions, but they're also on track to overshoot their existing carbon budgets, or the amount that the world can emit before exceeding the current global target of 1.5 degrees. Okay, so let me just clarify something about this whole climate change thing. Because this really needs some clarification. First, environmentalists prevented nuclear energy from happening. Germany's going off nuclear, and we're creating an energy shortage on purpose, which only punishes poor people, by the way. This is not going to affect wealthy people. This is not going to affect people with disposable income. This is going to hurt people on the margin. That's the first thing about climate policy. The second thing is climate change is coming, and it doesn't matter what we do. Anybody who knows Earth history at all understands that the climate is going to change, and it's going to change dramatically. 1.5 degrees is nothing compared to how much this planet is actually going to change. Humans need to learn to adapt to that environment. There's nothing we can do to stop it. It's coming. And at the end of the day, most climate policy is simply making energy more expensive, which makes foods more expensive, which makes poor people starve. That's it. That's climate policy. All this nonsense about electric cars, renewable energy, it's all pie in the sky nonsense. We need nuclear, we need natural gas, and we need to direct the limited resources we have to things that make sense, like building a giant solar farm in America's deserts to power our southwestern cities, instead of trying to somehow create an entire fleet of electric vehicles, tying up all this lithium, creating a massive infrastructure that we're never going to get off the ground to charge electric cars, which aren't really any more environmentally friendly than the gas vehicles that they're going to replace. So the whole thing is ridiculous. Nobody's putting forward any policies that are actually going to help. And again, at the end of the day, the climate's going to change, and there's nothing we can do about it. We better get ready for the change that is inevitably coming, not starve poor people in a vain attempt to stop it. Anyway, this has been Brian for Liberty. I hope you enjoyed it, and please like and subscribe.